In this discussion, I want to discuss the temporary protected status. If you're a TPS holder, if you're the beneficiary of temporary protected status, you're probably concerned. There's a lot of TPS news, some of it good, some of it bad, and it can be very confusing for TPS holders to figure out which way the winds are blowing in the future. So let's get into it. As you probably know, recently there was a Supreme Court decision that was negative to TPS holders. It said essentially that a grant of temporary protected status is not the equivalent of an admission, inspection, and parole into the United States. As a result, the decision meant that just because you want TPS, you could not necessarily adjust your status at a local government office to become a permanent resident. Many individuals reacted to this news as if the sky was falling, as if this was the end of the world. Well, it's not. The decision was limited. It was limited to immigrants who are undocumented, who have no other path to permanent residency. But in this discussion, we're going to discuss those issues. We're going to discuss what the Supreme Court decision meant, what it means for the future, and what options still remain for individuals who may have been affected adversely by the decision. The Supreme Court decision had to happen because some federal courts in certain states had said that, yes, if you get the stamp of TPS, it's like being stamped at the border when you enter. It has the same legal effect, and therefore you can apply for permanent residency here in the United States if you meet all the other requirements for a green card. Other federal courts in other districts, in other states, reached the opposite conclusion. They said, no, a TPS grant is not the equivalent of entering lawfully at the border. This is no way for the law to operate. For instance, I had individuals calling my office saying that they were planning to move to the South, to Alabama or Georgia or a similar state like that, and they were wondering if they moved and they had TPS, could they still apply for permanent residency in those states and be successful? I also had calls from individuals in the South planning to move to California, and they were asking if they moved to California, they were TPS holders, would they be allowed to apply for permanent residency here in the United States? Well, that's no way for the law to operate. The courts were split. The districts were split. So the Supreme Court had to intervene. The Supreme Court had to step in and make a decision. And the decision was adverse to TPS holders. But the real reason that we even reached that point was because the TPS statute has never defined the word temporary. The statute, known as temporary protected status, never defined the word temporary. What is temporary protection? Under the program, people have to re-register 18 months, and the government will reassess at that time if the conditions are safe in their home country for them to return. But the government never set a limit, never set a cap to how many times a re-registration can be granted. And Congress may have considered it, but they certainly didn't want to debate it. And any decision they reached anyway would have been arbitrary. What if they had, for example, said 4 times? You get to register once, you get to re-register 3 times. Well, that would have been arbitrary. But since each grant is 18 months, that would have been a total of 6 years. And at the end of the 6 years, What if the conditions in the home country were still not safe to return? What if TPS had been granted because of an environmental disaster and the problems were lingering in that country? The infrastructure was still a mess. Houses hadn't been rebuilt. Homes were still torn down. Or what if the TPS grant was given to individuals from a certain country because of civil strife, a civil war, and that war was still raging on the streets? The battles were still going on. Then, were they going to just send people back to those horrific conditions? That was the problem from the outset. Temporary was never defined, and any definition would have been arbitrary. So enter the Trump administration, and they look at the temporary protected status, and they saw countries that had been there on that list for more than 6 years. And they said, wait a minute, that's not temporary. And that's what the critics were telling them. No, that's not temporary. And so they embarked upon trying to end the TPS program. And that set in motion an avalanche of lawsuits, which are the problems today in TPS. As we'll move on into another point, I'll have to discuss what is going on with the outcome, the consequences from those lawsuits stemming from the Trump administration. So, despite the Supreme Court decision, there are some non-TPS paths to permanent residence. Even though a TPS recipient cannot adjust status in the United States as an equivalent of entering legally, of being admitted, inspected, or being paroled into the United States, some TPS holders actually entered lawfully before they received the TPS status. Not many on a percentage basis, but some. And those individuals were not cut off by the Supreme Court decision. They can still go forward. Now, for those TPS recipients that are married to a United States citizen and they came in undocumented without being inspected at the border, they would have to return home for their country. But that is an alternative path. The danger with that path is that they have to win a waiver for the time that they were here unlawfully present. But in some cases, individuals that received TPS received it at a young age, and so the time wouldn't count against them. And if their TPS status is still current, that raises some very important legal questions that you have to consider carefully, and you should consult with somebody to discuss them before going forward. The danger, again, is that with having to win a waiver, you have to prove hardship, which is a very tough concept to understand and a very high standard to meet to win, but it can be done. Then there are others. If you get thrown into court, let's say that the government says you no longer have valid TPS status, and one day you're apprehended and you're placed in immigration court. But you're married and you have a family, and your wife or husband is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, as are your kids. You can claim what is known as cancellation removal. And again, you have to fight the battle over the concept of hardship, but you would be qualified to fight to win a green card. And there's other measures, even outside of court. Asylum. Take Syria. Syrians who have TPS should possibly, in many cases, win an asylum case and therefore win permanent residence through that measure. There's other cases, other countries. The two new designations, Venezuela and Burma, I personally believe would have very strong asylum cases should they have to present their matter in that sense. But remember, asylum is an individual situation. It depends on your situation before you left the country and whether you would meet the requirements for asylum. But asylum is one. Some VAWA recipients, primarily females, have been abused by their spouses. They would be eligible for the Violence Against Women's Act program. Or maybe they were the victims of crime. They would be eligible for the U visa. Maybe they were even trafficked into the United States. Then they might be eligible for a T visa. Then there's programs like registry, if you've been here so long, or the diversity lottery. In fact, I recently had a call from someone that had TPS and they're waiting for the ultimate decision for their country on TPS. But in the meantime, they won the lottery. And so they wanted to know if they're eligible now to get a green card through the lottery. So there are other measures of TPS, other options for TPS holders to win a green card. And those are issues that have to be explored. You should not give up on the idea that you can win permanent residence until all those possibilities are explored for you. So the biggest fear, though, is TPS dying? And that's been the fear since the Trump administration went on a rampage against temporary protected status program. There's an October 4th deadline. There were 6 nations, recipients from 6 nations that filed lawsuits against the Trump administration because the Trump administration was actively trying to start the termination of the temporary protected status program with the termination of 6 countries that had TPS designations: El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Sudan, Nepal, and Haiti. And 5 of them still have an October 4th deadline, by which time the government is going to announce whether they're going to allow those countries to still live under the TPS designation or whether they're going to go along with the termination. Those countries lost the lawsuit, but the administration can still redesignate them for TPS status. Haiti has been redesignated, and so they're out of the loop. It's the other 5 countries. So is TPS dying? Well, there's been some recent new countries added, as I mentioned, Venezuela and Burma. That alone tells me, under the Biden administration, TPS will not die. And certain countries have been redesignated for another 18 months rather than terminated. Besides Haiti, there's Somalia and Syria. Those are indicators that the TPS program is not about to die overnight. However, for the 5 countries that are on hold, October is a very big date. However, even if TPS ends for those countries, even if you're a beneficiary as one of those country members' citizens, one of those citizens from one of those designated TPS countries, you can still look at the possibility of the other options that I mentioned. And I have a video on the other options that you probably want to watch on 8 pathways to permanent residency for TPS holders, even if TPS is terminated. You will probably want to look at it. I'll put a link to it below this video. You'll probably want to watch it to get more details on how you might qualify for those measures. So the sky isn't falling. An option was lost. Some countries may get cut out, but there's still hope for all the individuals that have received TPS now or in the past. And I would recommend that you strongly consult with an attorney who practices TPS law to find out if any of these other options can assist you in your quest to become a green card holder here in the United States and live happily ever after, assuming you're married, with your family, with your wife, husband, and kids. And perhaps one day after that, become a United States citizen. Take care and good luck. Thanks for watching. Know someone who might be interested in this video? Then please take a moment to like and share it with them. Also, if you would like more videos on immigration, just click on the subscribe button. And here's a little bonus, a short guide that you can download for free by clicking on the link on the description box or the square-shaped image. Plus, if you have ideas for videos you'd like to see, write a short comment below or feel free to contact me at carlos@VitaraImmigrationLaw.com. My name is Carlos Vitara. I appreciate your time and hopefully we'll be talking again very, very soon.